Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your moderator for this session, Andrew Capariso. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Stacy. Welcome, everybody. I'm Andrew Capariso. I'm the moderator for this session, 4B, Advances in Data Collection. Thank you for joining. This session is being held to inform interested parties of research and to encourage discussion. The views expressed are those of the authors and not those of the FedCasic committee, the moderator, myself, or sponsoring agencies. At this time, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. Attendees can submit written questions using the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom center or right side of your WebEx screen. Please take a moment to locate that now. If you don't see the Q&A button, click the panel options, which are the three dots in the lower right corner of your screen. Make sure that you specify the presenter to whom you are directing your question, which we have 4 different presenters. After all the presentations, we'll have time for question and answers. If you encounter any technical issues during the session, try exiting the session and rejoining using the WebEx browser version instead of the actual WebEx program itself. If technical issues persist, contact FedCasic at bls.gov. Okay, and so with that, we'll get started with our first presenter, my former JPSM classmate, Matt Virgil. His presentation is titled Redesigning the Census Bureau's Contact History Instrument to Improve Survey Paradata Collection. Take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, let me get this ready. All right, good morning, everyone. Let me move this out of the way. Yep. So I'll be talking about redesigning the Census Bureau's Contact History Instrument to improve survey paradata collection. I work in the Office of Survey and Census Analytics in the Field Directorate at the Census Bureau. I'd like to thank my co-authors, Laura Hergert, Lee Beck, Ann Russell, and Fane Lineback. They all work with me on the CHI transformation. I seem to be frozen. I'm trying to go forward. I'm just stop sharing just for a moment, then try again. I'm not sure why I froze there. Sorry about that.
You can also use your spacebar. That may help as well. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Let's try that. There we go. Great, thanks. So I'll start with some background on the CHI. The Contact History Instrument, or CHI, is a data collection instrument used since 2004 by census interviewers, also called field representatives or FRs, to collect data on each CAPI contact attempt in various demographic surveys. The CHI may be launched automatically when FRs exit the questionnaire for a given survey, but can be launched manually as well. So the data collected in CHI includes whether making a contact attempt or some kind of non-attempt action, the contact's mode, such as personal visit or telephone or something else, the date and time of the attempt, with whom contact was made, if anyone, some things about the outcome of the attempt, such as whether the interview was completed or reasons for inability to complete, any respondent concerns or kinds of reluctance the FR observed or that a respondent voiced, and contact strategies used by the FR. Oh, I'm sorry, I tried the space bar and it just made me stop sharing. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. Well, let's try sharing again, see what's going on.
Okay, sorry about that. So here's a table of CAPI surveys that currently use CHI. There are a dozen here showing survey names and acronyms. I'll mainly be talking about the current population survey and adapting CHI for that, the one in the middle. I'll touch on a few others as well. So this slide shows the current way that we collect contact history data. So you'll see there's a CAPI instrument, and here for example, we've chosen 3 of the surveys: CPS, ACS, which is the American Community Survey, and then HIS, the National Health Interview Survey. And on the left, there are things the FR collects during an interview or during a contact attempt with the respondent. So going from left to right, you see 3 boxes for each survey. The first one has survey-specific screens to collect contact history for survey pathing. And then if they establish contact with someone and they're able to do the interview, they go to the second step, which has the survey screens to collect the actual survey data if they're doing a partial or complete interview. And then the third step after that has survey-specific screens to collect contact history for survey exiting. And all these happen during the interview or during a contact attempt with a respondent. And you'll see 2 of the 3 boxes have this red outline around them. And these indicate some kinds of information that are redundant with what is collected in the CHI later. So the one before collecting survey data, sometimes we call the front of CAPI, and the one after survey data, sometimes we call the back of CAPI. So after the contact attempt or after an interview with the respondent, the CHI is then launched. And again, there are 3 steps, and 2 of which are redundant with the survey front or back. So there are CHI screens to collect contact history and for CHI pathing, screens to collect contact history for survey exiting. And then the last part has some screens that are unique to CHI. They mark things like what kind of strategies they use and kinds of reluctance they observe. And then because of this, there's no communication between the CAPI instrument and the CHI. There can be conflicting information recorded between them. Things like what contact mode was used, what language someone spoke, reasons for inability to do the interview, or things that are might be collected in some form in both places. So this slide shows the future way of collecting contact history data. And here we would integrate the CHI and CAPI consistently to collect all contact history as the interview occurs, rather than after the time of the attempt. So for those same 3 surveys, CPS, ACS, and NHIS, we have 3 parts. First is the screens for survey pathing and contact history. So this is what we call the front. So this would eliminate the need for a separate CHI instrument. Then would be the survey-specific screens to collect the actual survey data. And then the third part would be the CHI back, the screens collecting contact history for survey exiting, including things like the strategies used and reluctance reasons. You also see 2 of the 3 boxes for each survey are in green. So the CHI front and back parts. And these would be based on standard modules with a selection of response options. And this could vary by survey. Some things may apply to some surveys, not others. So the slide shows another way to understand the current design versus the future design. So in the current design, the contact history instrument, what we currently call the CHI, is separate from the survey instrument. CHI opens after the instrument is closed, and there are some redundancies between them. But in the future design, we will call this case history information, keeping the acronym CHI, but different words. This will be collected within the same instrument before and after survey data is collected to eliminate redundant questions. So CHI is one of many data collection systems being redesigned at Census as part of what is called the DICE program, Data Ingest and Collection for the Enterprise. The goal of the DICE program is to simplify and modernize data collection. And some of the anticipated benefits of the CHI redesign are having more accurate case history information, having less time and less burden on the FRs to enter the information, and also improved monitoring of contact attempts by field supervisors and other Census Bureau management. Talk about the logistics for creating this new CHI. The first step is loading initial content into what's called the Questionnaire Design and Metadata System, or QDM. So the initial content includes things like block names or screen names or question names, the text of the screens or the questions, the answer lists or answer fields, and then also variable names and output values. Then we also program additional features like the branching logic, saying with certain answers picked on one screen, what screen should come next. Also creating validations, things like hard edits or soft edits, and then also programming fills. So this could be a placeholder where an address or name comes up based on an input file, or some text on a screen based on what they chose from a prior screen. And the next steps are coordination between the CHI team and other teams to ensure seamless integration. So we will be working with CAPI survey sponsors and team leads to work out transition from CHI front to the survey, and also from the survey to the CHI back. Identifying redundant screens, things like contact mode or reason for non-interview, and having CHI handle those. And then also accounting for all relevant event codes or outcome codes that pertain to each survey. We'll also be working with DICE points of contact for other new field data collection systems and their teams and programs. So things like QDM, which I mentioned, some of these new systems like Mojo and Casey and Centurion, and working with web and CAPI standards teams as well. So the timeline for the new CHI. So as of now, CHI blocks are loaded into QDM for integration with the current population survey. This is the first survey for the DICE onboarding. Other surveys will be integrated later on. We recently completed user acceptance testing and a systems test, integrating the CHI and CPS. And starting next month will be a field test number 1, running May to September, and a second field test will be scheduled in 2026. For the remaining CAPI surveys after CPS, they'll have CHI blocks updated in QDM between this year and 2028. There's a staggered timeline for the other surveys. Some things we'll have to do a little differently than we do for CPS. Some of the surveys require additional CHI screens or different ones from CPS because the sample unit is something other than a household. Some might use person or group quarters or facility. And also some surveys will require additional CHI screens because they require collecting neighborhood observations by the FR if they're doing a personal visit at a sample unit, whereas CPS will not require that. Here I'll show a couple of flowcharts explaining the new CHI, and after this I'll show some screenshots so it's clear. So at the very beginning, NFR has a screen where they're asked if they are making a contact attempt or not. So we call this CHI or case management choice. If they say yes, they go to the screen called attempt type. Here I show a second flowchart. So on the attempt type screen, there's many paths, but suppose they're doing a personal visit. The shortest path would be they select personal visit. They select the on the locate screen, they say the unit, they can locate the unit, it appears occupied. And then a screen where they get some instructions called ready, ask if they're ready to begin the interview. If they say yes, continue, that would launch the survey instrument shown in that green circle. So that's going from the CHI front is the instrument. Now this next one shows from the CHI back, from the survey into the CHI back. So suppose the FR completes the survey, they then lead to some CHI back screens asking things like what language someone spoke, whether they want to set an appointment, reluctance types they observed, and any contact strategies they used. And then a second way they could go from the survey to the CHI back would be if they indicate they could not complete the interview at some point, maybe they need to save and exit from the questionnaire. So that would immediately lead to the CHI back, but the first screen was called no complete, would ask why they were unable to do the interview. They'd select a reason, and then the branching would vary from there, but it could include all or some of these screens after. So I'll show some of these screenshots. So here's the CHI front screen asking, are you making a contact attempt for this housing unit? In this case, the FR says yes and clicks next. And this is a fictional address. And you see that we have this CHI logo on each of the screens as well up on top. And describe this attempt. For attempt type, they say personal visit. The front screen locate, ask them if they're able to locate. And then if so, what best describes the unit. So here they say I can locate, appears occupied. And then this ready screen gives the FR some instructions, introducing themselves, what to do, and asks if they're ready to start the interview. If they click yes, continue, that would be the end of the CHI front. They launch the beginning of the CPS questionnaire. So I won't show the CPS screenshots here, but I'll talk about the CHI back. So suppose they said contact made, unable to interview, or they needed to exit the survey at some point. That would lead to this screen called CHI back, no complete. What is the reason you're unable to do the interview? We show the first 10 reasons here. There's actually a couple more. If the FR scrolls down, suppose they chose reluctance or refusal by respondent. Language did the person speak? Here they choose English. They say no to scheduling an appointment. Then for respondent, behaviors, concerns, reluctance, they can mark all that apply. Here they marked not interested and privacy concerns. And there are other options not shown. These are the first bunch. And what strategies were used. In this case, the FR left a promotional packet or some kind of informational brochure. So that would be that explains the CHI front and back path. There are some other CHI functions that can be done besides contact attempts. So the current CHI allows collecting data about case management functions other than attempts. Some of these include readying a case for transmission, reviewing or changing case information, and locating activities. due to changes in some of the other data collection systems that are being developed. Some of these will need to be handled by Kai. So some of these include requesting a letter, updating respondent contact info, updating building management contact info, or updating case notes. So the future Kai will allow capturing all these types for CPS as well. And then this flowchart shows from the screen asking which activities they're working on. Depending on what they pick, there's various flows. And then I'll show the screens to make this a little more clear. So if they say no, they're not making contact attempt. The next screen would ask which of the following activities are you working on? And they may mark all that apply. And whichever screens come next will depend on what they pick here. So next steps. So there are varying sample units by survey, which I mentioned briefly before. So whereas CPS uses household as sampling unit, some other surveys use person within household or group quarters or facility. For example, the National Health Interview Survey samples up to 2 household members. So for this case, Kai will design modified or additional Kai screens that are compatible for NHIS with person level contact attempt info. So this could be done by having a single Kai front block for the household. But then if once the rostering is done, we could administer separate Kai back blocks for each sampled person. And then for other examples, ACS group quarters, other surveys will sample group quarters or facilities rather than households. So some Kai screens could have distinct options that apply to only these sample units, not to households or persons. Other next steps, so 2 of the surveys, I mentioned NHIS, but also SIP, which is the Survey of Income and Program Participation, require an additional block of Kai screens known as the NOI, the Neighborhood Observation Instrument, where the FR records things they observe about the sampling unit or the neighborhood. So the Kai team held a focus group last February with field supervisors from each regional office to collect feedback on some NOI screen mockups. And we've incorporated this into future NOI screen design and loaded new NOI screens in QDM. The focus group discussion centered on things like new screen layout, whether to scroll to combine some screens, response options and orderings, and also whether to place the NOI in the Kai front or the Kai back, so before or after the questionnaire. And participants volunteered feedback on some other things as well. So the current NOI design, which is in the Blaze instrument, is only launched if the FR is attempting a personal visit, and it's meant to be completed once and only once per unit. It has 16 total screens, 1 question per screen. The FR first says whether or not they observed the sample building or unit, and then if yes, they complete a series of other screens. If no, they would exit NOI and go to other parts of Kai. So some of the main takeaways from the focus group. We asked about whether we should have a new question asking whether they're at a multi-unit address, which is not currently there. And then if so, whether to observe the unit within the building. This would reduce the burden on FRs. They could skip some items if they indicate they're at the building but couldn't observe the unit, because in the current NOI, for the series of screens asking about the unit as opposed to the building, they would have to mark unable to observe several times. And we also found support for combining similar questions into one screen with scrolling. There are the 1 question per screen. Because a couple of things with similar themes are questions asking about select building or unit features, select features of the unit only, and then unit demographics, where the FR has to give their best guess about demographics of people there. Other takeaways from the focus group, there were mixed thoughts over whether the NOI should come in the Kai front or Kai back. Some argued having it in the front would avoid bias of the FR, having their answers about the observations based on interacting with somebody if they got an interview. Others felt it better belong in the back. Maybe it's safer for the FR if they can start the interview quickly. It's less burden rather than keeping someone waiting or making them suspicious. And it's also more similar to how they fill out the NOI right now. But we also asked the focus group how they felt about a hybrid placement. So they're given the option to start NOI in the front. If they say no, they can't start at this time, they would have to do it at the back. And most FRs prefer this rather than placing in only the front or the back. So the future NOI design, which will be in Centurion rather than Blaze. And here I've just bolded what is different as opposed to the current NOI design. So having some questions and multiple questions on one screen, reduce the number of screens. And then not just whether they observe the sample building or unit, but whether they can complete the NOI at this time. And that would determine whether they fill out the NOI now or later. and also whether their address is in a multi-unit building, and if so, whether they could observe that unit, not just the building. So final next steps about additional differences between surveys. So QDM allows adjustment of CHI programming for a given survey without overriding earlier settings that are needed for another survey. So we can handle things differently for, say, NHIS without overriding what we did for CPS. Some of the differences between surveys might require adding or removing CHI screens, adding or removing or modifying text or response options on screens, and also possibly changing branching logic between CHI screens or to the survey or from the survey. So CHI programming will take any of these differences into account, including things like procedural differences, whether the survey is longitudinal or non-longitudinal, whether vacant units are in scope or whether it's only occupied units, whether they emit proxy response and who can be a proxy, and finally, whether a self-administered mode is offered, since any of these might require changing programming. That's all I have. I can answer questions at the end, or people can email me later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. All right. Yes, all questions, please feel free to email Matt or put them in the Q&A, and we'll have time to have discussion at the end of the session. Okay, next up, we have Jason Kosako from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. His presentation's titled Understanding the Motivations for Business Participation in Voluntary Web-Based Business Surveys. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. I am sharing my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you, Andrew, for moderating this session. I'm going to be talking about the motivations why businesses participate in voluntary surveys for online-based business surveys for the Federal Reserve System. I am going to scroll here. Cool. All right, before we get started, to do anything, you really do need a lot of voices, a lot of thoughtful people. Dave Tuttle at Census was a wonderful thought partner on this. So Dave, I don't know if you're listening to this, but thank you. And also the benefit of calling Dave out on the first side is if you don't like any of this, you can complain to Dave and saying that his thought partnership wasn't good enough. Just kidding, Dave. Thank you for all your help on this. And yeah. So the research that I'm going to show today is the first time I'm presenting this outside of our team. So there is no bad feedback. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, or anything, it's all on the table. So please, 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 this is important to me. This is important to our institution. So I encourage everyone and anyone to speak up or message me afterwards. So we have a paradoxically simple question that we want to answer. So why does a person take a business survey? So there are tons of response theories out there that try to understand this. And the one that I'm going to lean a little bit on now is social exchange theory, is because for the past 40 years, this theory has been the workhorse for most of our surveys. There are other theories, Groves promoted leverage salience, there's adult-to-adult communication, there's persuasion by Cialdini, but social exchange theory, for the most part, has been the main way that we communicate to potential respondents about participating in our surveys. So what this theory entails is a person is more likely to take your survey if they believe and trust. Those two words are really important, that the rewards for taking your survey will essentially exceed the cost of complying, right? So we go out, we tell a person, we need you to participate in this research, and these bullet points really are the things that we owe to that respondent, right? So being upfront about how we're going to use the information, it's us asking them for help. We provide questions that are interesting. We're a legitimate sponsorship of the survey, so it's not just done by a random organization. So they trust that the sponsor is able to provide information that's relevant to them. Stressing scarcity. People believe that this is an opportunity that they can't pass up. They're more likely to comply. Others have responded. Incentives are probably the most important reason by far why people participate, but not all surveys can offer incentives. And the highlight benefits of participating. And not denying that they exist, right? And also just make the survey as easy as possible to answer. Tons of repetitive questions, hard to answer scales, complicated language that they may not know will lead to drop-offs, right? And they're just less likely to comply. So we have these theories of why businesses participate or households participate in people. But what we do know is response rates for all surveys I'm just showing you here for the BLS establishment surveys, response rates have been declining. This is not new news. This is another presentation about declining response rates in survey research. Not the happiest topic, but it's where we are as an industry. But we know and have been applying all these response theories, but we're still seeing the same downward trend of response rates as we're seeing for household surveys, right? So the Richmond Fed and some other Federal Reserve banks, we want to figure out ways to improve our recruitment and retention strategies for the surveys that we administer. These are all web surveys, but however, there's not a lot of information existing on why businesses participate in surveys, right? So we have the challenges that we are facing is like our response rates are plummeting like everyone else. All the response theories that we utilize in establishment surveys are based off the literature from household surveys. So social exchange theory developed by promoted by Dillman, that was based off households. Same with leverage salience promoted by Groves, that was based on household telephone interviews. So we don't really know the motivations why businesses participate in surveys. So a lot of what we assume about why businesses participate, it could be wrong. I mean, they are human beings and they have similar motive and they have motivations, but we don't know if answering on behalf of their institution is the same as answering on behalf of your household or for yourself. So we saw the opportunity to try to better understand response behaviors directly from businesses in our surveys. We broke this data down by both firm demographic information and also respondent information to see if there's any interesting themes or any interesting trends along those lines. And we want to use this information within the Federal Reserve System to build out strategies to better recruit businesses into our survey panels and also to create retention policies and practices that can better retain businesses to continue participating. Before getting into the methodology, these next two slides, or this slide here, is the number one question I get afterwards. What is the Federal Reserve, how it's broken down, and why is it the way it is? So the Federal Reserve System established in 1913 is a decentralized system of reserve banks that are located throughout the United States of America. So the Board of Governors in DC is a government institution. The Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, where I work, is not a government institution. We are a nonprofit owned by the banks within our district. So my region encompasses the Carolinas, Virginia, DC, Maryland, and West Virginia. My co-author on this paper is Brooke Dertsu. She's in the Cleveland branch, which covers Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, and parts of Eastern Tennessee. So I'm not a government employee. The people on the board are government employees. Our system is decentralized that way just so that they could pass the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and that's the system that we're currently operating in. So when we did this research, not all banks across the system have surveys, or they don't have consistent surveys where they talk to businesses. So there are 9 banks out of 12 that have business surveys. Of those 9 banks, 6 participated. So highlighted here are the regions in which businesses participate in this research. The challenge with having a decentralized system is the way that we collect data are all disparate. We ask questions differently. We categorize respondent information. For example, firm size can either be coded as a continuous numeric value or could be coded as ranges. And when it's coded in ranges, the range buckets could be different between banks. So that does throw a little bit of challenges into the mix, but we're still able to administer our research across these 6 banks. So about the Federal Reserve Regional Bank surveys, so of the 6 banks that participated, all our surveys are administered via web. We use Qualtrics to administer our surveys. The panels in which our panelists are managed through are all online, obviously, and all the communications are done via web. Each bank operates their own web panel of businesses. So what I operate is different than what Brooke operates, which in Cleveland, which is different than Dallas, which is different than Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and so forth. So when we do any outreach to businesses to participate, that outreach is done to recruit them into our panel. So the first contact that we have with a business about our surveys is not for them to take the survey, but it's to actually have them participate, to join our panel. So then we can push them a link. So we don't produce official statistics. All the information that we do produce is meant for FOMC policy. So every 6 weeks, the Board of Governors and the regional bank presidents, they get together and talk about monetary policy. and the federal funds rate. So this information that we produce via these surveys are meant to give real-time information about changing business dynamics in the regions that we represent. While survey participation is voluntary, we cannot force anyone to do anything. So we can't put on envelopes or emails that if you don't participate, you will get a note from our inspector general. That doesn't fly for us. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to get businesses to participate. The way we find businesses to participate is a mix of probability sampling and also convenience. So we do traditional mail, phone call, email sampling. And we'll also just have general networks and advisory councils that we talk to, and they participate in surveys as well. And most importantly, we cannot provide any monetary incentives. So probably the strongest tool that there is to get businesses to participate is something that we can't utilize. All right, so within our surveys, each 6 reserve banks added one question, and that's the question on the left. So we added, please tell us the reasons why you participate in the survey. And it's an open-ended response. So Brooke and I, we worked together over a couple of weeks to code each open-ended response in tandem to ensure that we had agreement in how we coded the response. We spent about a month reading through the responses, developing a code book. And that's where Dave Total at Census was a really big help for us, or for me at least, to figure out like, is our code book make sense? Does it align with current theory? Is it really giving us useful information? Here are just sample counts. Overall, we had 967 responses to this question. So most of the fielding dates were in September. So for the Richmond Fed, which I manage over the research of, we've been including this question in all our surveys. So every new business gets asked this question. So we're just trying to understand at the point of signing up for the survey, why they decided to participate. We'll get into this a little bit later. So in the slides that are coming up in the actual findings, I'm going to show 2 sets of data. The first set is data from all the banks, all 6 banks that participated. So the information we have there is location of the firm, the industry they're in, the number of employees they have, and how each firm was recruited into the survey. However, not all banks collect microdata on the respondents, but I do have that information. So I'm going to show from the Richmond data only the job title of the respondent, the response frequency. So did they respond to all the surveys every month, or do they respond sparsely or rarely? And also we know how long they've been in the panel. So it's just looking at the different respondent behaviors and information type to get a better read of motivations. Cool. All right, what people really care about here is what the actual data tell us. So these are the coded out responses on why businesses participate in our survey. The most important reason, almost 20% of motivations was, so the Fed understands the economy. So what the Federal Reserve does in terms of monetary policy affects all businesses. And it's important for these businesses that we understand really what's happening on the ground from them. So by participating, this is their opportunity to provide us with information about what it's really like. The second reason at 18%, which is an opportunity to be heard, you can think of this as scarcity. So if you are a small business owner in a rural part of our district, chances are policymakers are not talking to you about what's really going on. So this is an opportunity that you might not necessarily have to represent your business, to represent your local community, to represent your niche industry in policy discussions. So the Fed has accurate, good data. This is specific to us having data and information. They want us, when we go into policy discussion, to have good information, which makes sense. That was at 17%. And that's few. So the Fed is able to make good decisions on policy. That's similar to the previous ones. But the benefits of actually the cost benefit to participation is the next 2. So 11% of respondents participate to receive a tangible benefit. We don't offer incentives, monetary incentives, but we do offer the results of the surveys every month. We do offer webinars with bank leaders to hear about the economy. And we do provide them with other informational benefits like that, which a lot of businesses find valuable. So an intangible benefit of participating in the survey is also just allowing for reflection on their business. So by getting the results of the survey, they can compare themselves or benchmark their business against others in their industry or region, just get a sense of what they're seeing makes sense. Breaking it out by firm size, if you're interested in data cuts by industry and state, things like that, I can share that afterwards, but this is really where the most interesting information was. So the largest firms participate just so we understand the economy, and the smaller firms are more interested in making sure that we have good information, accurate data, right? If you're a small firm or a mid-sized firm, you can probably imagine that you might feel overlooked. So that benefit's a little bit more important than the larger firms who just probably get regularly invited to councils and other things like that. Always important to kind of show what we mean by these different coding buckets. So I dropped in a couple of comments here. What it means for the Fed to understand the economy is hopefully my answer provide the government with a picture of the business environment which my company is facing. I think it's important that U.S. decision makers hear what is happening to real brick and mortar businesses as opposed to those fake brick and mortar businesses. And it helps the Feds hear directly from the trenches. The opportunity to be heard, like businesses want to ensure that input is being received so they can impact policy that underlies our financial success. They want the state to hear their voice and work to help small businesses succeed. And I represent small business owners and want to make sure our voices are heard, right? So this is scarcity. This is an opportunity to really be heard on something that they believe is important. So for us having good data, like informed data about the economy is important, for us to do accurate analysis. It's important to provide input that helps to make a more realistic picture. And they want to give the Federal Reserve a good picture into the economy. And here's around just the tangible benefits. I found the output. So the survey results helpful to broaden my market perspective. It helps me think about my business, and also it helps to see how other companies are doing in this business environment. So I'm going to go on to the Richmond Fed findings. So this is the Richmond Fed Bank only. And the information we're going to look at is specific to respondent behavior rather than just firm demographic information. So here's how the Richmond Fed recruits businesses into their panel. So you have traditional methods of recruitment, so non-FRBR relationships. So we'll work with Dun & Bradstreet, DataAxle, or a third-party data vendor, and we'll get contact information. We'll do cold calls, cold emails, and physical letters. We partner with business organizations and they promote our surveys either through newsletters or they might do their own survey, then put a link to our survey at the end. And we also have these relationships. So we might present to a chamber of commerce, for example, then ask them to participate afterwards. Or, we just regularly talk to a lot of businesses and we solicit them there. So on how businesses are recruited into the panel, there are interesting dynamics on recruitment mode. So those like cold outreach that we do, they really want the Fed to understand the economy. Like that's important for them. For those businesses that we have established relationships with, they want the opportunity to be heard. It kind of makes sense that they're serving on an advisory council. They might think they're important and they think they have an interesting perspective on things. They just want their voice to be heard a little bit more. I'm gonna go a little bit quicker. So this is looking at response motivations by how frequently they respond to the monthly survey. So less than 50% means they respond to less than 50% of the invitations they get. 90 to 100% means they respond to nearly every invitation they get. You can see over here, like the Fed has accurate, good data. This is a little bit more important for like those lower mid propensity people. So the intangible benefit of being able to reflect about your business is not important at all to low propensity. And the Fed understanding the economy is generally pretty important for all people, but it's a little bit of a wash there. How long they've been in the survey panel. So if we recruit somebody a month ago, they would be recruited less than 2 months. Then if they've been in the panel for more than a year, so it would be in this bucket here. So the newest panel members, they're most interested in making sure that least interested in understanding the Fed understands the economy, but the newest panel members want to make sure they joined because they want the Fed to have good information and accurate data. Whereas the longest serving members, they care about kind of like understanding the economy. And just by job title, executives are interested in being heard, whereas kind of like those non-executives, so this might be a comptroller, a regional manager, things like that. They just want to make sure the Fed has good data. Cool. And I'm just going to get into the discussions here because I'm running long on time and I apologize. So the overall question is, why do businesses participate in surveys? The main reason is they want businesses to understand what business conditions are really like, but they also want to be part of the process. I do think that's a strong motivator, just understanding like that unity that we're all in this together is a strong motivator for participation. So it's an opportunity to be heard, right? There were some difference on motivations by firm size, which was interesting, specifically around the smallest and versus the largest. Um, there were differences that were interesting by how long businesses participated in the panel, right? So the newest panel members want the Fed to have good data and to be heard, whereas those who've been on the panel for longer, they really enjoy the tangible benefit. So invitations to webinars, the monthly survey results, things like that, and being able to reflect about their businesses. So how are we applying this information right now? So in Richmond, we are creating a content strategy based on panel duration. So if you are new to the panel, then you're going to get information after your second or third month about how we're using the information that you provide in monetary policy discussions, just to show like your participation is important. The Cleveland Fed has used this results to make their information more public and to better engage with the panelists around what the results mean and things along those lines. But probably the most striking thing here was none of these findings were surprising, right? Other research has found comparable motivations for panel participation. And also, what's interesting is like experiments on tailored communication strategies don't work better than just a standard language that works, right? So using motivation-based appeals don't lead to higher response, which is interesting because we did all this presentation work and all this research to show if you're recruiting someone, it won't make a difference. And that's really discouraging, but I think there's a bigger issue at play. Um, right. So the quote over the top, right? I want the state to hear my voice and work to help small businesses succeed and to help eliminate the sound of big government trying to shut down small businesses, right? They want their voice to be heard. But this is all rooted in trust, right? It's important for the participating business believes that by participating, that they can make a difference, but there's also shared interest, right? We both want things to get better for the economy. We can, as we have the ability to make a difference, and that we're benevolent in our actions, right? So we're acting to make things better for all businesses. And I think a lot of the times in the motivational based appeals, it's just the survey's important, you can make a difference, right? But if you can root it better in trust and reestablishing that social exchange relationship, I think that would go a long way. And that's kind of my hypothesis right here. So I like putting together infographics. So this is why is survey participation declining, even though why we know motivations to participate. I think it's just the unbalanced nature of our relationship between us and the respondent, right? We ask for good coverage rates, we ask for good response rates, quality data, and useful information. We may give $2 up front and a post incentive afterwards. The surveys are long. There are lots of surveys out there. Every time you go to Panera Bread, you get a survey asking you to participate. My daughter just had surgery, and we got a follow-up survey the second we got home about the experience, right? Just kind of flooded with all of this, right? But we do need to rebalance this, and we need to better think about trust, right? So I put these questions in here and we have questions at the end. I want all feedback. I think this is important, especially in the field of establishment surveys is trying to get better at this. Here's my contact information. So I'm Jason. Brooke is on the call as well, and she's been a thoughtful partner on this. And that's all I got. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jason. Again, anyone with questions can put them in the chat here in the Q&A, and Jason's email is also here on the screen oh, nope, and now it's gone. So use the Q&A, people. Okay, so next up we have Shobik Barari. The title of his talk is, and he's from NORC at the University of Chicago, and the title of his talk is AI-assisted probing can improve survey data collection. Shobik, take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Andrew. Hopefully folks can see my screen okay, but just give me a shout out if not. Not hearing any, I'll get started here. So hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. So today we want to talk to you about a framework for what we're calling AI-assisted conversational interviewing and some initial results for what it can do for something that we all care about, which is data quality. I just want to quickly acknowledge the efforts of my team members here beyond myself. As you can see, there's a number of other folks who are involved in this work. So, you know, please recognize them for all the good work you see here, and you know, blame any of the faults on me. Okay, so to dive right into it, this work is about addressing a core problem of survey methodology. In particular, historically, there have been two traditionally separate methods of survey interviewing, dating at least back 100 years, if not longer than that. And they're standardized and conversational interviewing, the two kind of distinct modes of survey interviewing. Standardized interviewing, you might think, if you want to think about analogies here, it's sort of like factory produced survey interviews, whereas conversational, it's sort of more, it's a bespoke experience, if you will, that's tailored to each individual being interviewed, right? And so there are trade-offs for each mode, unsurprisingly. For standardized interviewing, the things that it does do for quality and the user experience include efficiency, right? Web surveys are perhaps the pinnacle of this, right? To scale up from 100 interviews to 10,000 interviews is relatively costless and frictionless. Consistency, right? There's no additional effort involved in standardizing how questions are asked, and also comparability in that there's no additional effort involved in actually standardizing responses if you were using closed-ended questions, right? On the other hand, you might think that it weakens quality and also impacts the user experience through things like inflexibility, right? If the respondent doesn't understand the question, there's no opportunity to clarify. If the researcher doesn't understand the response, there's no opportunity to go back to the respondent, in most cases, to clarify, right? There's limited opportunity for depth and for follow-up, certainly on the specific content of individual respondents and responses, right? Without a ton of effort. And relatedly, right, to actually exert effort to personalize the experience is burdensome. And using techniques like piping can get tricky really fast. Tricky, certainly, and almost definitely expensive in terms of time spent preparing the survey instrument. Let's think about conversational interviewing, right? This is a human administered mode of interviewing where the respondent and the interviewer has the opportunity to adjust their responses and questions, both ask follow-up questions, re-ask the same questions, and determine the rest of the interview in real time, right? So this enhances the experience through flexibility. It allows the opportunity for depth, and it also allows for personalization. You imagine if respondents have to report things like, say, a crime incident, or report the details of, let's say, a healthcare visit, an experience with a surgery, let's say, something that was just brought up, right? These are very personalized things, and the questions to be asked to actually really get the depth of that experience may vary a lot from individual to individual. On the other hand, there's a very good reason why many of us in this field use standardized surveys and not conversational survey instruments, which is that a lot of the things that come for free don't come for free with conversational interviews. In particular, standardized comparable responses, right? If different questions are asked to different respondents, you might imagine this issue of construct drift. You're actually asking about fundamentally different constructs, right? Psychometric constructs, particularly with open-ended responses. It's inefficient, right? We know that hiring good interviewers to administer conversational interviews is expensive, and of course these interviewers are human, which leads to human error, right? Just a couple of papers that support these differences that we've seen over the years in this literature. And so to kind of get to the core methodological question I want to talk to you about today is, can generative AI, and specifically we mean large language models, can they bridge the trade-offs between these two ways of administering surveys, standardized and conversational interviews? And in particular, our goal here, right, is to collect better quality survey data. So what do I mean by better quality survey data? So I mean a couple of things. Number one, can we get more informative open-ended responses, right? So can respondents actually elaborate on their responses in real time, which you can imagine is useful for a variety of question topics. In addition to maybe raising the ceiling, can we also raise the floor, right? Can we reduce the rate of junk open-ended responses? Probing respondents in particular to give a better quality answer if they give something that is unsatisfactory in the first go. And finally, can we, all of us most of us who work with open-ended responses, certainly quantitative survey researchers, they largely work with these through the lens of labels, right, or codes on those open ends. And so can we actually use generative AI to generate more accurate codes? In particular, can we actually get more out of the live interview experience in the generation of codes for our code books and for our open-ended responses, right? I'm going to talk about all these things in a little more detail here and give you some examples, but to kind of introduce you to the research design we followed to experimentally evaluate this. So we ran a survey experiment with a conversational AI platform, of which there actually are many out there in the world today, to test the effects of precisely this, of AI-based reprobes, and also this real-time classification procedure on data quality. So again, just to formalize this, there are three primary research questions, right? So can elaboration reprobes elicit more informative responses? Can relevance reprobes reduce junk responses? And can this process of live classification followed with what we're calling confirmation reprobes produce more accurate codes of open-ended responses? Okay, let me walk you through some examples here to get a sense for how we're testing these. So on the first research question about what we're calling elaboration reprobes, how does this work in practice? So, the status quo for when you're administering web surveys, whether they're sort of in this kind of format of text message style, or if they're kind of standard Qualtrics instruments, just to name a kind of instrument, right? They usually all look like this, right? When you're asking open-ended questions, such as what do you think is the most important problem facing this country today? The respondent gives the response, and you typically move on, right? No matter how detailed or informative that response was. The incorporation of AI into this process allows for the opportunity to actually ask a follow-up question, and not just any follow-up question, right? But a follow-up question that incorporates the content from the respondent's response, right? So you can see here that, this person gave a one-word answer. That's great, but we want to get a little bit more from this respondent, right? We want to understand the motivations. Perhaps we want to understand a little bit more, detail, clarification to reduce the ambiguity, from just a response like inflation. Inflation can mean a lot of different things, and so we get exactly that back from the respondent. We get some useful detail here. Inflation affects ordinary people's everyday lives and decreases quality of life. So that gives us something a little bit more to work with from this respondent. When we talk about relevance reprobes and reducing junk responses, there's sort of a similar mechanism here, right? So the respondent could have given a completely irrelevant, useless response to this question, right? And so relevance probes are a mechanism for the agent here to ask the respondent to just give to reword what they said, or give a relevant response, right, as the name suggests. And finally, can we get more accurate codes out of open-ended responses? So, the typical process for generating codes looks something like this, right? So you typically wait until all your responses are acquired from a survey, and then you have coders to actually go through and code each response, post hoc after data collection concludes. And the usage of generative AI here allows you to actually do this in real time with the respondent, right? And so we can provide our interpretation of the respondent's answer, and the respondent can actually confirm whether this lines up with what they intended, right? And so we actually get the respondent to be a participant in the coding process, which you could imagine is helpful for a variety of reasons, not least of which, related to the last talk of increasing trust and sort of collaborative understanding between the respondent and the researcher. Okay, some more detail here about the research design, how we set up this survey experiment. So we had 4 distinct experiments, so module level experiments within our research design here. So one related to this question of most important issue, one related to economic conditions, one related to preferred news source, and then a final experiment, having to do with occupation. We chose these questions because they sort of span a wide range of types of questions and topics, right? Some of these are quite literally opinion questions, whereas others are more factual elicitations. The kinds of response categories, you know, in the closed-ended versions of these questions tend to differ. News source, for example, can be a variety, can be of varying levels of specificity, right? You could say that I get my news from, you know, Facebook. You could say that you get it from like a social media site, or you could say that you get it from a specific outlet, right? So this gives us a good amount of variation to test, you know, the usage of generative AI across different contexts that you might want to use it. We had 3 experimental conditions here. So one that was control, no probes asked on the kind of seed question in each of these modules. The first treatment was just administering elaboration or relevance probes, right? Ask for more detail or ask for clarification if needed on the question. The second treatment was doing this kind of live coding confirmation probing on the seed question. And I won't go through this in a lot of detail here, but just to give you a sense of the response, the question format across these, and for the coding, what specific concepts we were coding for, right? So political issue in the first, sentiment, as well as reasons for sentiment in the economic conditions question. And, you know, just to say that we sourced these all from real surveys that we all, you know and love and trust, right? And then at the very end, we asked a number of questions about respondent experience. I won't talk about that much this session. You will hear about that, though, very shortly. Okay, so let me again kind of zoom in a little bit just to give you some more intuition for how this works, right? So let's talk about the main occupation question. So what did this look like in the control condition, right? This what we did is we asked, you know, what kind of work do you do in your principal job, and we asked them to actually select from the list of BLS job codes that best describes their job, right? You know, long list. You can imagine it's potentially burdensome for the respondent to do this, although you do get this clean code back from each respondent. The alternatives, right, the 2 treatment versions of this, were both asked in an open-ended way. So in the first treatment, if the respondent gave an answer that was specific and relevant to the question, that's great. Then we moved on to the next question. If they did not, the LLM generated a follow-up question based on that content, based on whether it was not specific or whether it was not relevant. Different kinds of questions depending on what was missed. In the second treatment condition, right? Okay, same open-ended question. And then if a category was detected from the BLS codebook of occupational codes, the LLM asked for the respondent to confirm this. If a category was not detected, then the LLM, and then we actually just directly asked the respondent to code themselves the response to their question, the code for their response. So we fielded this on a non-probability sample of about 2,000 respondents recruited from a non-probability web panel provider, and we split this evenly across conditions here. There's of course lots of opportunity to tailor the underlying large language model for each question. We did not do so in order to get a more conservative estimate of how well large language models can improve data quality without any sort of additional tuning from the researcher, right? So this is like a floor for how well this, AI could, enhance data quality here. And we conducted this experiment last year over the summer. Let's talk about outcomes here. So a couple things we were interested in. First of all, we were interested in classification performance for the second treatment condition, right? So accuracy of the codes generated, and we measured accuracy by having a team of human coders actually go back and code the responses. And we also looked at the rates at which respondents actually confirmed, yes, the LLM got interpreted my response correctly, right? I'll just say that these two actually varied from each other in interesting ways, which I'll talk about in just a moment here. On response quality, so we also had asked our coders to code a number of different quality criterion, which you see here, including relevance, specificity, whether the response was complete, whether it was comprehensible, and so on. And in addition to these human coded criterion, we also had these computational measures of basically of textual information, right? So things like lexical diversity, the rate at which respondents use unique words in their answer, right? Shannon entropy, Kale divergence, all things that, kind of heuristically capture whether the response is informative, right? a helpful supplement to the human measures. Okay, I'm going to show you just a couple of results here, and then I'd like to move on. So kind of in summary, what did we find? We found that indeed the confirmation probing administered by the AI TextBot did perform relatively strong without any additional tuning from the researchers, right? For example, there was 84% accuracy in classifying the main occupational category in that question. And as I mentioned, the human-coded distributions of the true label actually did actually differ a bit from the respondents' rates of confirmation, which suggests which we think suggests acquiescence bias. I'll talk about that more in just a second here. On the probing, we found that there were mixed effects on response quality. So it turns out that administering probing does increase both specificity and explanatory detail about their responses, but then other aspects of open-ended responses don't seem to change very much. Okay, so let me kind of dig into each of these in a bit more detail. As I said, classification accuracy was at least better than flipping a coin for each of these open-ended questions. Economic conditions in particular, classifying sentiment was extremely strong. All in all, above 50% classification accuracy. And notably, preferred news source, when we asked respondents to the TextBot to classify the news source from this code book, was lower than the rest. And it suggests, that the usage of proper nouns in these sorts of questions might be a barrier that researchers should account for in their fine-tuning, right? As I mentioned, there seems to be some acquiescence bias, that is respondents actually hitting yes in the confirmation probe more often than actually human coders noted that the classification was correct. That's why you see this none of the above, kind of above the rest here in this graph. So that is something that we think researchers should be mindful of. We think this is evidence that there's sort of a bias towards false positives when we're using AI text bots. Okay, I'm just gonna speed along here in the interest of time. So you can see indeed the rates of specificity and explanatory detail did increase with the usage of probing. These are the treatment effects here. And finally, this is just evidence to show you that there was no real discernible effect on NLP measures of textual information, whether it's KL divergence, the lexical diversity, or Shannon entropy. Okay, so kind of a quick hit conclusion. If you had to take away one message from what I just told you, generative AI can provide useful survey data. That is, it can provide relatively accurate codes without you actually doing very much. We think it could do better if you can do some extra work to fine-tune your model. And it can, at least cursorily, provide more specific or relevant responses from respondents. There's a question of whether too much of this might create a lower quality survey experience, and you're actually going to hear about that in just a moment here. I'll end by saying that you can read more about what I talked about today at this URL. The full paper is online, which includes many more results. And if you're interested in keeping the conversation going, you can do so by contacting me at my email.
Thank you, Shobik. That was really interesting. And I think we're going to hear more about it next. So next up, we have Elizabeth Dean, also from NORC at the University of Chicago, who will be presenting generative AI for surveys, prioritizing user and respondent experience. Ready.
All right. Thank you. Let me get my everybody see my presentation slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, thank you. And hi, everyone. I am going to talk now about ways we're prioritizing the user and the respondent experience in our research into generative AI for surveys. I want to quickly acknowledge my co-authors and frequent collaborators, Brandon Sepulvado, Shobik Bharari, Zoe Sawinski, and Ting Yan, all at NORC. I'm going to give a quick overview of AI just to set the stage for the presentation. I want to be clear that we're using this definition from the 2020 National AI Initiative Act. AI is a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. Also on this slide are some well-known examples of AI tools and features of tools, as well as some examples of things that are not AI, but are related and might be a part of AI systems. Taking sort of a holistic perspective about AI work related to surveys, there are several types of work that can be done. There are many ways AI can help us conduct surveys more efficiently and effectively. So starting with productivity and efficiency, supporting literature reviews and early drafts of questionnaires, documents, and presentations, to research using AI, to build tools that do things like analyze text and audio data and monitor data quality. Survey research has been very involved in conducting research about AI, which is very important as we all adopt these tools in our lives. But also in the survey research community, there's important research going on to evaluate AI systems for things like bias and feasibility, and to assess the user experience, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Like, how does the use of AI for survey research impact researchers and survey participants? So let's take a look at where these types of ways to use AI fit into the survey lifecycle. This survey lifecycle diagram is from Groves et al.'s survey methodology text from the 2000s. The point of this lifecycle is to identify all stages of a survey from a process perspective, right? So it starts with defining the research objectives, which kicks off 2 parallel tasks: choosing modes and designing the questionnaire, and choosing a sampling frame and designing the sample. Once these processes are complete, data collection begins, followed by coding and editing data, making post-survey adjustments, and performing analysis. So we've been using this model to structure how we think about implementing AI into the survey process. It helps us identify gaps and opportunities, and helps determine the scope and needs of AI tools. So now I'm going to talk about 2 examples. The first one is a follow-on of Shobik's work in the chatbots for data collection research. So the question here is, can AI agents improve data quality and improve the respondent experience? And this research represents the design and implement data collection phase of the survey lifecycle. As Shobik just presented, we conducted a pilot experiment to compare using chatbots across a range of question topics and types. Found fairly promising results, accuracy across a range of questions. The chatbots generated more specific and explanatory responses with their probing. And as I'm going to show, there was really minimal to no impact on the overall user experience, and that depended on the type of automated probe. So as a reminder, this is sort of an example of what the chatbot interface and the survey process look like. So for the chatbot study, we captured respondent experience in measures of burden and of satisfaction. We looked at breakoffs and we looked at self-reported experience measures, including the perceived quality of the respondent survey responses from the respondent's perspective, their ease of completion of the survey, their overall frustration, and overall satisfaction. So looking at breakoffs, most breakoffs happened in the first and second questions of the survey. On the first question, breakoffs happened most often when respondents were receiving the elaboration and relevance probes. These were the slightly more burdensome probes that asked for more follow-up detail. On the second question, breakoffs were pretty much evenly distributed. But it's important to note it was a small subset of respondents who broke off, about 1 to 4% of respondents per question. And it's very important to note from a UX perspective that almost all breakoffs were mobile, where it can be more cumbersome to interact with a chatbot. So our perspective of what was happening here, beyond it being more difficult to enter open-ended text on a mobile device, was that respondents probably did not expect a chatbot survey. The survey was conducted with a GenPop opt-in web panel of participants. They were likely expecting a traditional survey form. And participants probably also did not expect a heavily open-ended survey. And that's why those who weren't interested or didn't have the time to do a chatbot-based survey dropped off early on. We also asked respondents, as I mentioned, to rate the quality of their responses, the ease of completing the survey, their frustration, and overall satisfaction. We found that overall, probing very slightly increased self-reported frustration and decreased satisfaction with the survey. But again, these were very, very slight differences in responses. We did include control covariates around gender, age, education, work status, and device type. So based on that initial study, we believe that chatbots can provide useful survey data with minimal respondent burden. Again, remember that very few respondents broke off and dropped out of the survey. As Shobik presented, probes yielded accurate codes and more detailed, better quality responses. It's important to note that the participant experience was worse for mobile respondents from what we observed in the breakoffs. And respondents reported slightly more negative responses to the ease of use, frustration, and satisfaction measures. In general, some basic UX principles we've developed for chatbots based on this experience. First, it's important to tell respondents what you're doing and why. Again, chatbots aren't a typical survey experience, so we might want to let them know for some questions, the survey might use a chatbot to make answering the questions easier for you and to help get a more accurate understanding of your experience, or some sort of language like that. Rather than conducting a whole survey using chatbots, it might be a situation where we recommend limiting the use of chatbots to a subset of questions that will benefit from deep dives into open-ended responses. That said, chatbot questions could use buttons. They don't have to be open-ended. And a chat format should be used when a conversation makes sense. True open ends or items where a conversational approach will help recall. Finally, future use should optimize chatbots for mobile users using buttons, using voice entry, etc. Okay, so that was the chatbot survey, and I want to provide another example of using AI for survey research and how to think about it in the context of user experience. So this example, can AI help methodologists more quickly and cost effectively design high quality survey questions? This example aligns to an earlier stage in the survey lifecycle, constructing and pre-testing questionnaires. Our team is in the preliminary stages of testing the ability of chat-based generative AI tools to conduct questionnaire reviews. So we've started by asking ChatGPT to use Willis and Lessler's question appraisal system to evaluate surveys. As a reminder, the original QAS provides a taxonomy for evaluating survey questions for issues in 7 categories: reading and instructions, which most often apply to interviewer administered surveys, and also clarity, assumptions, knowledge and memory, response categories, and sensitivity or bias. This is an example of the knowledge and memory category on the QAS form. In conducting the first set of ChatGPT QAS appraisal, I took a very basic approach, asking ChatGPT to use the QAS. So I just asked, using the QS99 linked here, please conduct an appraisal of each of the following survey questions and ask me any additional questions you need to refine your appraisal. And ChatGPT delivered a question by question appraisal with the following response on the back end, which is what I hoped it would do. It gave me follow-up questions asking for more details about the context of the survey. So what's the target population, the mode of administration? Are any of these questions required to align with validated instruments, or can they be modified freely? And would I like ChatGPT to suggest revised versions of the questions? I thought these were good questions to ask. So I took ChatGPT up on the offer and provided some clarification about the target population being Gen Pop US adults, surveys to be conducted in English and Spanish, self-administered by web, and provided the clarification that the questions don't need to align with previously validated instruments, but I wanted ChatGPT to identify similarities to existing instruments, and ask for a second review with that clarification. So our preliminary results, ChatGPT followed the spirit of the QAS and effectively identified common problems that a survey methodologist would find with the questions. It identified problems in the categories of clarity, assumptions, multiple problems in regard to response categories, but it also it identified problems that were part of the QAS but weren't really aligned to the taxonomy. So it didn't do a good job of mapping the concepts it identified to the QAS categories. But the problem identification itself was actually solid. So from my perspective, this is fine, right? The intent of the QAS is error identification, anticipation of questionnaire issues, not really the accuracy with which a user codes a question problem to a QAS category. It's more a tool designed to elicit as many problems as possible in questions. But what does this mean from a UX perspective? If we wanted an LLM to deliver QAS results that aligned more accurately with categories, this is one where we might have to do additional model training. But if my goal as a user is to generate problems, it's fine. It's just kind of funny, actually, that it gave the wrong code to the categories. For example, like calling clarity code A as opposed to category number 3 with it, which it actually was. For purposes of using generative AI to generate QAS reviews, I think the best approach is to treat the AI like your research assistant. My inclination is that as we identify more tools that are well suited to taking advantage of generative AI, we should adapt the methodologies for AI research assistants. For this example, we, the researchers, are the users, and we want the tool we want to be able to use generative AI to generate more usable results. And I've got one more slide. I know I'm running out of time. But to bring this back to the survey lifecycle, taking a user-centered approach to AI and surveys means understanding that user personas are going to differ depending on the phase and process of the survey lifecycle. And it means that we should be considering UX from multiple perspectives, from the respondent, questionnaire designer, data collector, analyst, etc. And that's it. Thank you. I look forward to any questions or feedback.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm sorry I let everybody run a little long, and so you do have some extra time if you wanted it, but I can also get the Q&A started. If there's anything you wanted to go back to share.
Let's go to Q&A.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for attending today and for our 4 great presentations. I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet, but I hope we have a lot of participants here, so I'm hopeful someone might be able to have something they'd like to ask about. I will kick things off with Elizabeth and Shobik's presentations. Thank you for kind of demonstrating AI's use in actual survey data collection situations. I saw, I was struck by the high accuracy rate that that the AI was able to classify the open-ended responses. I wonder, in the examples you showed, there were single word responses. Did you ever get participants who put in very elaborate responses, and how did the AI kind of deal with that kind of things that would actually might come up in a conversational setting? So maybe that's a Shobik question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Happy to jump in there. So it depended on the question that was asked. We noticed earlier on, some of the earlier, like the opinion elicitation questions tended to have, if any, multiple concepts, actually multiple issues, for instance, in the issue question that were brought up. It was nowhere near most of the responses, but there were cases where 2 or more responses, technically concepts from the response codebook were brought up. And so that brings up the question of, like, in the probing, right, which one do you probe on? And so there we actually basically had the equivalent of the TextBot flip a coin and asked to probe on one or the other. If there was one concept that was brought up earlier on, it was like very clearly that was the first concept that came to mind, and that was mentioned in the response, that was prioritized. But it does lead this, it does create this interesting problem or question, right, of like, if there's a lot to probe on, what do you steer the conversation towards? And this is certainly in the literature something that, like, human interviewers have to be trained in, and it depends on the goals of the project, and it depends on the particular interview and the question, but it's an interesting problem for sure.
I hadn't thought about the idea of, like, them saying inflation and crime, and then so you said you would flip a coin, and that the AI would flip a coin in that situation. Have you considered, like, a follow-up probe to say, we asked for one thing, can you be more specific, or something like that? Or would you rather not? Is your experience you would rather not be that pushy, or have the AI be that pushy?
Yeah, right. And so to kind of formalize it, right, like in a particular question or a response to a question, we are sort of assuming that we just want elaboration, or we just want relevance, or we just want to do confirmation probing. But it could be like we need to do all 3, right? In this case, we basically did what you said. We didn't want the AI to be too pushy, but in reality, you might want to do all 3 of those things, right? Or maybe you have a rank ordering. Yeah, I really want elaboration, even if the risk is that there's slightly more irrelevant responses in my data set. So I think it depends on the the goals of the utility function of the researcher, so to speak. But yeah, and I'll say again, last thing is that this was all just single turn probing, but if you increase the number of probes to say 2 or 3, you might be able to accomplish all those goals.
Cool, thanks. Okay, I do see a question showed up in the chat, but it's being answered in the chat. I will assume it's addressed there, and I wanted to ask Jason, you got a lot of valuable information from your respondents. Did you get any information from your non-respondents? I know you showed a chart that kind of categorized respondents by how often they respond. But I'm curious if you kind of really focus on the inverse question. Do you get more insight into non-response issues?
No, we did non-response is one of those things that is really hard to know without doing another survey. And these people don't want to
Totally.
take surveys to begin with. What I will point to is research done by, I think it was the Statistics Netherlands, and they had like 500 follow-up interviews where they went door to door trying to ask people why they didn't participate in the survey. And out of 500 people, they got told to essentially screw off by 500 people, and not one person participated in non-response follow-up. So my best guess is people just don't like to take surveys, and there's just a population of that you don't know what to do with. But and also there's a lot of right place, right time aspects to survey participation. So the moon's not lining right. I think that's kind of going against us in a big way. But yeah, non-response kind of issue is a really big thing that we're trying to understand, and there's no good way to understand it.
Yeah, it's $1 million question. It's really unfair for me to ask, but I know that it's important. It's the fundamental question about why our response rates keep going down. If respondents were motivated by getting kind of the feedback from the survey itself. I assume your sample size are so large, it's not going to affect your data to like show your respondents. They're not going to react to the data and, I don't know, maybe have that influence their future responses or something.
That's a good question. We haven't looked at differences in response behavior by duration in panel. We look at it by how they're recruited into it, but that's a good point. The assumption is no, because our surveys don't ask for nominal levels. We just ask for how to have things change compared to the previous month. So we're hoping kind of like this qualitative information doesn't get impacted by the conversations we have with them prior to those interviews.
Yeah.
Question.
I think it's a safe assumption. Great, thanks. Looks like we have a new question in the chat for Shobik. Were there hallucinations from the AI in the probing, and were there consistent issues with this?
We did not find really any rates of hallucination in this particular vendor platform, and there's some interesting trade-offs here that I didn't really get time to get into. When you're relying on a platform that someone else has kind of carefully built for you and carefully trained and fine-tuned for you, there are trade-offs, right? The limitation is that you can't actually do a lot of the fine-tuning that I described yourself. You could actually do some in the platform that we described, but you can't really go further and say, hey, like I want multiple probes in this exact sequence. But the benefit of that is if you're in this controlled environment, chances are there are these guardrails around the the outputs from the LLM that prevent or at least kind of safeguard hallucination. And actually the vendor we went with, they actually published their methodology, and they talked about exactly how they did that. Some of that was just very careful, well thought through training of the LLM, but there are other guardrails. So it really depends on how you're doing this, I would say.
Cool. Thank you. Another question for the NORC team. How much of the dropout was a function of the chat format, and how much was a function of the probing follow-ups? Sorry if I missed the detail in the research design.
I think Shobik, jump in if I'm wrong, but we don't know for sure. I can pull up the slide, but what we found, sorry, let me, so I think what was going on is that in the first question, the people who were most likely to drop out were the people who got the elaboration relevance probe, which was the more detailed probe request. And the second question, everybody was dropping out equally across all three treatment groups. And so I think the answer is both. In the first question, it was because of the probing type, the probing follow-up. And the second question, they probably just realized, oh, this is a survey with with all chatbot questions, and the people who did not want to participate dropped off right then. Um, that's what our evidence, the evidence we have tells us, but we don't know for sure.
Thank you. Chobik, did you want to add to that?
I think that's basically what I would say. The other possibility is that it could have to do with the specific question that was asked. And so you might imagine a design where we randomize the order of the questions. So we can't really speak to that. But I think what Elizabeth said is what we know.
Cool. Thank you. Well, we are at time at 12:45. I'll happily stay on with anyone who wants to continue to ask questions, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I was asked to remind everybody that the next session starts at 2 o'clock. Advancing survey data management, tools for enhancing accuracy, efficiency, and automation. So again, a round of emojis to our presenters. Thank you again for participating. If anyone has any questions, and the presenters are available to stick around, then we can continue to chat. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending today. Yeah, so we do have one from for Jason for the Fed Reserve Bank team. If you were a Federal Survey employee speaking with internal stakeholders, how would you encourage response uptake? Very poignant for the conference population question.
So I don't know if I 100% understand. Is it how do I encourage other people within my organization to participate in this type of research? And is that how you interpret it?
I think so.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great question. The answer is it's very difficult. I think it goes down to back to trust, right? And I think about trust as like shared interest, benevolence, and ability to do something about it. So if you go into it as like, here's the problem statement that we're having, we can't get people to participate in our surveys. How can we go about answering that, right? There's a shared interest across everyone. We need people to take surveys so we can create policies and understand what our society is like. But how do we go about that? The benevolence, like we have the ability to do it, and just the partnership, that's gone a long way in getting that buy-in from internal stakeholders. It didn't work for all. We got 3 banks that just said they didn't have the time to participate or they have competing interests, which is fine. Then at that point, it's just like a nagging email or an IM for me asking them to reconsider, which helped a little bit. But it's just establishing trust and kind of like that unity of we're all in this together, I think. It helped a little bit.
Thank you. Well, Matt, I wanted to get you back in here a little bit. Thank you for your deep dive into the kind of the census's efforts to, I guess, kind of standardize their contact history management across surveys. And this is part of the DICE program, you said? Yes. And I guess, could you say a little bit about like how that's going, and if it's other components of that effort to kind of make sure your methods are consistent across studies?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that is part of the goal with the CHI transformation, is trying to make it more standardized, while also still acknowledging differences for some surveys, allowing some flexibility. Yeah, CHI is one of a couple of systems that are being changed as part of DICE. So one part I didn't get into was right now, field interviews use something called MCM, the mobile case management system, where they view their workload and they click they want to begin work on a case. And that's being changed to something called CASEY, CASEY, which will function a little bit differently. So a lot of systems are going to be changing in the coming years.
Cool. I think it's important, particularly with this AI breathing down our neck. I know a lot of methodologists out there anxious to hear Elizabeth's results about the ability to evaluate questions, myself included, because I know that is we like to think is a custom, an art more than a science, but I'm sure Chat GPT and the AI models are just going to get, more nuanced and nuanced. And so how do we remain effective and continue to do good work and leverage AI? Obviously, we want to use it if it's efficient inaccurate. But it's certainly a brave new world to explore. And so I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. There's still a lot of participants here. If you want to ask a question, I guess if I dismiss any presenter who has to go, obviously. But if there's nothing else, again, thanks everybody for joining. Please join the next session at 2:00.
Thank you, Andrew.
And yeah, thanks again to our presenters. And I guess that's all. Everyone have a good
Thanks, everyone.
rest of your day. I think a question didn't just come in, but I just didn't scroll right. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.